first and foremost, can everybody hear us? If you could just give a real quick yes or no in the chat, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
That's Chief.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, yes from Sergeant Lunas, yes from Sergeant Davenport.
All right, I'm moving this meeting because
We're good from here.
Echo.
Yeah.
So we can be heard. Thankfully, Staff Sergeant Cummings was nice enough to give us a fancy microphone that we can actually use to kind of streamline our voice. But to start it off, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our Coping with COVID series, where we talk about leadership, reflections, and different things that we may have seen in our careers. So we'll start off with introductions, which we actually have a guest in our schoolhouse, and I'm going to allow him to introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Technical Sergeant Kevin Ferguson, and I have been in the Air Force for 17 years. I'm currently an NCOA instructor at the Kisling Non-Commissioned Officer Academy at Ramstein Air Base, and I'm ready and I'm excited because, as our commandant likes to say, it's always the best day of the week.
All right. There are a lot of NCOA folks in here from the way the chat looks as well, so make sure y'all give props to Sergeant Ferguson as he helps us out with this topic. I am Technical Sergeant Vanegas. I'm an instructor here at Ramstein ALS. I've been here for almost a year and some change now, and I had the pleasure of working with Sergeant Ferguson as he subbed in as one of the instructors here when he got dual certified. So great opportunity, especially to work with him and the NCOA staff, and it's really a great and awesome opportunity, the fact that he's actually here with us today. Now, as far as it goes for our topic today, it will be risk-taking, and not just risk-taking in the sense of COVID. It'll be inside and outside of COVID itself. We will still talk about that topic as well, but we want to get the intent to be behind risk-taking as a whole in our lives, because COVID wasn't a thing a couple months ago. And once it does go away and we're all healthy and better in our lives, we're going to have to keep moving on. So we're going to have to keep taking risks outside of COVID as well. Now, the first question that we'd like to pose to y'all, and please answer in the group chat as you deem necessary, is when was there a time in your careers or in your lives where a decision you made was considered a risk to you? And also, why was it a risk? And actually, I'm going to pose this question to Sergeant Ferguson while we are waiting for those answers to come into the chat as well.
Well, me personally, it's always a risk, especially when you step outside of the career field. Being a PME instructor, being out for 3 years, you take a risk of losing knowledge, losing those things. But this is something that I really wanted to do. I really wanted to be a PME instructor, and I really thought that risk was worth taking. So risk taking, it can be a good thing, and it can also be a bad thing depending on your situation. But I haven't really taken a lot of risks, but I think that was a big risk on my part, stepping outside of the career field. Now I'm going back in the career field here in a couple months. I'm going to have to pony up. I'm going to have to catch up with the times of being away for three years, and definitely step up my game, because now I have to bring the new Sergeant Ferguson to the career field from where I have learned and grown over the past 3 years.
And that's definitely something that's very admirable and very awesome. I would also like to agree with you. When I actually got the job offer for my DSD, they told me that PME instructor was one of them. And a lot of people took a lot of risk in myself by thinking that I had something that I didn't quite see in the beginning. And I felt like, for me, it was a risk, because thinking the way that I did being prior security forces, like, oh, I completely was blindsided by all the negatives that came with being a PME instructor in my mindset at that time. I want to be out of career for 5 or 10 years. What if I lose my knowledge? What if I lose respect for my peers, because they may think that me leaving the career field was more for me rather than it was for everyone else? What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't do the public speaking and speaking in front of 12 to 16 students? And a year later, here I am now, and literally sitting in front of a webinar series that I definitely never foresaw that I would be helping be a part of. So it was definitely a risk for me. And there were a lot of things that came with that. How are we looking in the chat as far as it goes?
So Sergeant Pineda says, joining the military, leaving family and friends behind. So that's definitely a big risk. not for me personally, but I can see for people that are watching. My mom was actually in the military for a long time, so for me, they knew what was coming. But leaving your friends or family behind, they don't see you going to Germany.
Yeah.
They don't see you going that far out. A lot of people see you just, okay, you're going to join the military. You're probably going to be in another state somewhere. A lot of our military bases are back stateside, so it might be a little easier to keep in contact. But being overseas, taking those things, those are definitely risk taking, because you don't know if it's going to be a career, especially when you first join. You're like, okay, let's do 4 years and get up and get out. But that's definitely a big risk, leaving your family and friends behind. So from Sergeant Polito, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was very good as far as it went.
Okay. Risk from Technical Sergeant Polito, risk also involving juggling and balancing multiple things at once: school, work, family.
That's definitely a big one. I know, especially with anybody in their career fields, like most people are shift workers, even for our folks that work from 0700 to 1600. It is a big risk to have all the things you have to deal with in your professional life, to include all the stuff you deal with your personal life when it comes to family, friends, and significant others. And then you have to throw an education in there, because we all want to have educations and we all strive to have an education, but some of us often feel uncomfortable because maybe it doesn't fit in that moment. Maybe our initial reflection on that piece is, well, I can't do it because I'm too busy with work. Well, I can't do it because I'm working for the 5-6 or the top 3 or the first 4, depending on what tier and the level of your career field you're at. There's so many things that we feel are justifications from stopping us to taking those risks. And I just be remiss to say that when we talk about risks and risk taking, it can often bleed over into the concept of risk versus opportunity. What we initially think is risks are actually opportunities. It's just the amount of things that in our minds that we put against those things that make us stack it as this is a risk, because it can eventually cause something else negative to happen in our lives if we're not on top of it.
So another big thing with that is when we're talking about school, work, and family is communication. When we're talking to our families about what we're doing at work and how it relates to why do I have to stay back and grade how many ever papers because I don't want to take that home, or what I might be doing volunteering or going on a deployment. Well, now I have school. So communication is a big deal when talking to your family, making sure they understand the risks that you, or opportunities, as you like to, that was good, as you like to say, those opportunities, communicate those with your family.
Yep, definitely.
So Technical Sergeant Davenport said, I get comfortable at each duty location, but each PCS makes me readjust and help me get better at adapting to changes. That's good. Master Sergeant Sanner said, I think it's important to note the difference between taking risks when the consequences of the risk are going bad only affect ourselves versus the willingness to take the risk in a leadership capacity and cannot contain consequences to yourself. This applies to personal and professional life. I 100 agree.
Yeah,
100%
I definitely agree with that.
Because it's easy to make a decision and take on the positive, but when you make a decision and the risk don't outweigh the benefit, or let's say we fail at those things, to keep it contained to yourself and make sure that you're sharing the information that needs to be shared. That's definitely a big deal. Yeah.
Yep. Definitely. And the one thing that I would definitely want to add in here is whenever we think about risks and those things that are stopping us, whether it's something that we want to do, something we're aspiring to do, or looking at something that's new and unknown to us. One thing that's happening right now is this whole COVID-19 situation, which is also why this series exists. We started this on a whim to see if there would be a demographic of people that wanted personal and professional development. And by taking that risk, this has now been our third one. And we think we're making good progress on it, and we think we're making good traction on everything that's happening. And it's only through taking that risk that we found out that there is value added to certain things. And if you look across the Air Force as a whole, whether you're looking on Zoom meetings, whether you're looking on Facebook, whether you're looking in Snapchat, you're seeing so many people jumping out of their comfortability and jumping into the social media age to help make sure that we're still spreading personal and professional ideas and intents and development when it comes to all those things. And I think it's very awesome to see the Air Force innovating and renovating themselves in that regard, because if you had told me a couple of years ago all of Facebook's main flow of information and inspirational speeches would be coming from Facebook Live, we'd be having town hall meetings every single day. It was someone that was willing to present a risk to leadership and say, this is how we should move forward. And it was that leadership's ability to accept that level of risk and say, well, let's try it and see what happens. I think that's very important to see and admire in the fact that we are coming to this point in our careers.
Yeah, this has definitely changed the way that we do things for professional development. I mean, when you talk about having Facebook, I'm sure ALS has a Facebook to where you're doing this on a regular, instead of just now because of COVID, where you are putting out professional development, not only to Ramstein, but to those continued students that are out there that are continuing like, I went to this school and I'm proud to see that they're still doing professional development through Facebook, through Zoom, this has provided a great opportunity for the Air Force as a whole to innovate, and for you guys to step up and do this. This is awesome.
Yep.
So Master Sergeant Burton actually had talked exactly on what you were just talking about.
ESP, that's what it is.
And then Tech Sergeant Calizo, it is important with our risk to look at the reward. Some look at the possibilities of failure of what can happen, but they don't look at the rewards or the success. So yeah, it definitely depends on the risk that you're taking.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to, when I think about a risk, sometimes I think about jumping out of an airplane with a parachute, right? Yeah. Some people pack those parachutes, and it's your job to make sure that that parachute, you're still taking a risk, right? If that parachute doesn't fly, you have a second one. Hopefully you have a second one, but then you're still taking that risk. You're jumping out of an airplane, right? But the risk versus reward to get that, what do they call it? The junkies that they,
the dopamine rush.
Yeah, the dopamine rush there, where they jump out and they have that rush, that might be a reward for them. So that's a very good point, Sergeant Calizo.
So one thing I want to talk about is the theme that's been occurring as we're having this conversation. When we talk about risk, there's a lot of things that come to it. And the first step that we really have to take into account is acknowledging what is stopping us from taking that step. Now, when we talk about risk, there's long-term risk. There's something a goal that may be far off into the distance. And then there's those short-term risks that we take generally in the day, which is something as simple as walking up to a person and talking to someone when we really don't want to, or afraid of rejection or something like that. We're afraid of failure in the act we're trying to do. And that's really the first stepping point, is acknowledging what is stopping you from taking that.
So a lot of the things that we teach in professional military education, and when I think about this, is the OODA loop, right? Where we observe some of the things that are happening, right? The lesson link, the little pew, 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 right? So you observe, you orient, and you decide and act on the things that might be a risk for your career, for you as a person, because bringing it back to maybe you personally are taking a risk of, all right, I'm going to sign the dotted line for another 6 years. Now that's going to take me past the 10-year mark. Now that's a risk. Yeah. That's a risk, because now you are in the Air Force or in the military for another 6 years. And you have to be able to continue to perform your duties. Yeah. For some people, and that might not be a risk. That just might be, okay, I'm just signing dotted line because I know I have job security. Yeah. But depending on your situation, that could be a risk. So from Chief Master Sergeant Smiley, risk can be can bring about growth as it relates to careers. I've worked in MAGCOM, staffs, career assistance advisor, and the commandant. I was uncomfortable with all of these jobs when he took the risk in each of these. We have to step outside of our comfort zones and grow. Sometimes we don't take risks because of fear of failure. I fail almost every day and learn from each one. I think that's important. I tell all my students in PME, it's important to stay in the fire, because iron is molded in fire. And when you stay in that fire, not long enough to like burn yourself, but long enough to be able to mold yourself into something better, that's definitely a big piece of being molded and stepping into that fear.
And I definitely agree. There's an acronym that was told to me a long time ago, and if you Google it, it's actually in Google too if you wanted to find it. There are a lot of fancy pictures for it, but it's the acronym FAIL. FAIL is the first attempt in learning. Falling forward, if you will, falling with a safety net. And as leaders and as supervisors too, and not even just as supervisors, but as peers to our staff, and then as subordinates to our leadership, we often have to make sure that when people are willing to take risks, that we're looking to them and making sure that we're watching them, regardless of who they are. And this goes out of the span of just the Air Force as well. This goes to our loved ones, our friends, our family, our children, because we know when children start living their lives, they're constantly taking new risks. When it comes to even us as children, the first time that we hopped on a bicycle without tricycle wheels, and we were so scared because we didn't know how to balance ourselves. Our bodies didn't understand that movement and how it worked. To the very first time where a child for the first time grabbed a basketball and had to shoot a three-pointer. And maybe they didn't make the three-pointer in the first time. Maybe it took practice. They had to learn their foot placement. They had to learn their strength quality. And all those things eventually led to great NBA stars in our time. The one thing I would say is when we talk about acknowledging the things that stop us from taking a risk, our fears, as Chief Smiley talked about in his example, I think the next thing you should do is you should assess the variables and the obstacles. All the things that may be stopping us to do something, if we assess those things and we look at all the things that are stopping us, oh, well, maybe I'm getting looked at funny. Oh, well, maybe my confidence isn't where it needs to be. Oh, maybe this. Oh, maybe that. Oh, maybe the other. When you see those mental obstacles or those physical obstacles and barriers, one thing that's really important is you have to go through those things and assess them. Because once you start to think about them and you understand that there are ways to diminish them and lessen them, that is going to make you more likely to want to actually go through with those risks, which allows you to advance to the next step and to make that first step in the right direction. Whether it's a long-term risk that you're trying to do, or it's a short-term risk like going skydiving as opposed to being able to lift 225 pounds on the bench. One thing that was, and it's a funny story, everybody's gonna laugh at me for this, so I am in no way, shape, or form the most physically fit person in the world, but I was terrified of the bench press with the bar. Horrified. For multiple reasons. I was afraid that I was going to get laughed at for not lifting enough weight. I was afraid of the fact that maybe I'm not going to be as strong as I want to, that plateau mentality when you get there and you feel like you're not progressing anymore. I was afraid of how I looked with not having proper form the first time. And also, the one time I did try to actually get on the bench press, literally I had a bad spotter and he let the bar drop on my throat and I almost literally felt like my life was fading away. And as time went on, I had to assess all those things that were causing me not to get on that bench and get to the bar. And as time went on, I made a plan for myself. I started making advanced steps. So the first step was to get under the bench, with just get under the bench and stare at the bar and to conquer that fear of this is just the bar, there's nothing to it. I move it, it goes up and down. And then eventually like slowly starting to put weight on that bar as I did more reps and slowly got my confidence up. Now in no way, shape, or form am I lifting 225 pounds these days, but I can now do a bench press with the bar. So the next step's a squat rack because I'm definitely afraid of that too, but one step at a time.
All right, that's a good story, man. I can relate to that. That's good stuff. From Master Sergeant Lane, I think the military does a great job of instilling taking risks, new situation into our culture. How many times have you heard, if you are a little uncomfortable, you are not growing? So many times.
Exactly.
So
And
many times.
the growing uncomfortable piece is a very important part because, like with my example,
if you're not a little, you're not comfortable.
If you're not a little comfortable. Oh. If you are a little uncomfortable, you are not growing.
Yeah.
No, if you're not a little uncomfortable, then you're not growing.
Oh, he corrected?
He corrected, yeah.
Okay. There you go. My bad. I got you.
See,
or actually, they got you.
We're understanding. That's the first step. But that's a great point, though. And it kind of leads me to the next terminology that I think of when I think of running through this process. So we talked about acknowledging those things that stop us from taking risks. Then we talked about assessing the variables to lessen the fear of taking that risk, all the things that we think could potentially go wrong, and then advancing to those steps, or that one step, if you will. And then acclimation. Once you've gotten to this point where you've made the first step into conquering a fear that you have or getting closer to completing a risk that you're taking, acclimate yourself to that level that you're now at, because now that you're there and you've built the tolerance for it, now you need to start assessing the next step, the next direction that you have to go. Another example I can use is one of my students is very avid rock climber. And when she would go rock climbing and I asked her about it, I was like, oh, this is a crazy sport. Like, I've only done it, but I just do it. And there's so many variables. When you acclimate to the next step you take when rock climbing, you have to reassess your surroundings, because maybe your footing's not where it needs to be. Maybe your hand placement isn't where you thought it was going to be. And now when you're looking at that next spot you have to get to, you have to acclimate yourself to that new position that you're at and then reassess those variables to make the next move.
I like that. It kind of reminds me, because I was watching John C. Maxwell the other day, and he was talking about a puzzle.
Okay.
Usually a puzzle, you get the box and you have all the pieces in the box and you can have the puzzle there. Usually people are comfortable when they have the picture there because they have something to go off of. They're right there and they're putting the puzzle together. But if you give a puzzle without the picture, what does that do? That kind of creates a kind of uncomfortableness, right? Yeah. Because you don't know what the picture is. And that's exactly what we're doing right now with COVID-19. Right now, we don't have that picture. We don't know what's going forward, and us taking risks like this on Zoom definitely is a way of moving forward.
And it's definitely something that we have to think about moving forward, because every single time that we move to a new position in life when we're conquering risk, we have to think about the pace, the distance, the intensity, and the frequency in which we're doing things. Because we may have thought that we could have gone the full sprint to accomplish our goal or to conquer those risks. But as we start running and we start seeing more obstacles and more terrain changes in the way that we're moving, we have to change our distance, our pace, our frequency, and our consistencies. We may have to be in the gym longer than what we thought that we might have had to be. For me, it took me literally about 3 months to get over my fear to do a bench press, because I was so terrified of it. And my friends were like, oh, we'll get you through it in a month. Like, we'll do this, we'll do that, the other, you'll be benching in no time. But I was so afraid of those things that were hindering me from taking that risk. And it was just so soul crushing because I felt defeated, which leads me to the last point when we talking about conquering risk and actually doing risk taking, is admiration and admiring where you're at once you've made that next step. Because when you have those long-term things that you're trying to do when it comes to conquering risks, Chief Smiley made a great point in there. Every single time that he changed positions, he did not feel comfortable there. But once he was done with those tours, I can bet you money that he admired the position that he had conquered. And then when he moved to the next step, the next spot on the rock as he's climbing up that terrain and conquering that risk, he took a moment to admire all of his accomplishments and know that I did this. I conquered this, and now let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah, that's definitely important. When we take risks, we have to know that sometimes when you take risks, the payout isn't just going to be quick.
Yep.
Like right there. So sometimes sticking with that risk or continuing to push forward different jobs, different positions can definitely grow us to be able to move forward.
It's definitely something that we have to think about. There's a TED Talk actually that was really interesting to me where they were talking about kayaking in Africa. And I don't know the name of the river, but it was pretty deadly. And they had a documentary where they're basically saying, well, no one's out here to help us if it all goes wrong. So we have to make sure that we look at this in such a way that we section it off. So they looked at the river itself horizontally and vertically. They looked at the drops. They looked at the rocks that were coming at them. They looked at all these things, but they didn't look at it as the whole river itself. Excuse me. What they did was the members individually took each aspect of the river and they broke it down by pieces in which to conquer. And it's like, okay, there's some rapids here, not that big of a deal. All right, cool, next section. Okay, there's a drop. Like, we can do some experimentation and figure out if we can make this drop. And they went through the entire river that way. And once they had that mindset that they'd conquered every single piece of it, and once they combined it, now they were mentally focused and ready to conquer that fear that they had or that risk that they were trying to get through.
Okay. So I got Son Cruz said she loved the analogy with the riding the bike without training wheels. Give you a little fist bump on that one. Having someone there to help you when you're unsure or hesitant can make the difference. That's awesome because Ramside ALS, I don't know, one of you guys. What could happen if we need to take risk but aren't good at adapting? So one thing is I guess that really depends on the person, because if you're not good at taking risk or adapting to a situation, it could definitely make you feel uncomfortable to where you're not going to be able to hold on to that idea. What do you think about that?
I think it comes down to a concept that a good portion of my staff is tracking on. So we have what's called and you have this as well. We were both there for the same class. So it's called 5 Voices. Yeah. It's something that is hosted by someone that was actually the prior commandant here is Mark A. Tilser. He's done some great work with a lot of people in the Air Force when it comes to the movement he's trying to push. It's much like the 4 lenses, but the Myers-Briggs model is broken up a little bit more diversely to add another section to help people really differentiate who they are fundamentally. But when you go through this workshop, you learn of what's called liberators. And when you talk about a liberator, they're high support and high challenge. And I think when it comes to that example of adapting and overcoming, it's not just something that you do by yourself. Sometimes you may need someone, a confidant, if you will, or a person to hold you accountable. And I think as leaders, that's a very fundamental thing that we're seeing now in the Air Force. We're seeing this whole movement of where airmen are having to go to telework. And they have to rely and trust in those airmen to be developing themselves. They have to give that high support, though. They have to be there and ask them, what's going on? Like, what are difficulties that you're dealing with? What are things that I can do to push you to be a better version of yourself? And I think that's where the high challenge comes into play, too. And that concept is built off of what's being called the liberator, a person that gives high support and high challenge. And when it comes to the example of being on the bike for the first time, when I got pulled off my tricycle wheels, there were some people that were like, oh yeah, you can just do it yourself and you can figure it out. And yeah, you could fall about 80 or 90 times, scrape some elbows, scrape some knees, get some cuts and some bruises. But there's also another scenario in there when we talk about high support and high challenge. That father, that mother, that brother, that best friend of yours that already knew how to ride a bike, that put their hand on the back seat and they ran with you like, hey, you're doing a good job. You're doing a good job. Keep doing it. You're doing a great job. Keep doing it. And they let go and you didn't even realize it. Know. And then you turn around and you're like, oh my God. And then you fell again. But you made it about 100 feet before that happened. Yeah. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. If you know people that aren't good at that individual piece of motivating themselves and giving themselves high support and high challenge, you have to find people around you and surround yourself with people that will help give you those things. Because when you talk about risk, there's positive and negative risk. When we talk about negative risk, those are the situations where as children we were going past curfew because we thought our parents wouldn't notice. Maybe you had those people in the world that were doing bad things that they didn't. And psychological studies have shown that when people do that, they become numb to the idea of risk taking, but it can actually go in a very bad way. People can start getting into drugs and other bad things. But when we talk about positive risk, and you have that same effect where people are actually doing risk after risk after risk with the support that they have with those leaders and those people in their lives, you come to find that they now have a newfound confidence in themselves. And it was only because those people helped them get through that.
I like that you said that, because the people around you definitely help you, because we talked about at the beginning how being a PME instructor, that was a risk for me. But having the people around me, the Fab Five, shout out, the Fab Five around me, definitely helped me with some of the risks, some of the things that I had ideas, or we all had ideas. We would shoot, we would talk about them, we would come together and come up with certain ideas that would work out or would definitely not work out. Yeah. So I like that. I like having people around you is a big deal.
And I would even say that so me as an instructor, we had the luxury of shadowing for a little while before we went to EPMIC, the place where we learned how to be instructors. And shout out to the guy in the back over here, Staff Sergeant Christopher Cummings. He was a person that I shadowed. And even though when I got back to the schoolhouse, I was being evaluated by another individual, Staff Sergeant Randy Chavez, shout out if he ever sees this. I would often go to Sergeant Cummings and I'd be like, hey, like, I did this, like, what do you think? He's like, yeah, I agree, like, maybe switch it up next time. And this was my silent supporter. This was a person that he never got the accolades for my success when the eval forms came out, because it never said, oh, well, Sergeant Cummings was the person he shadowed. He's the one that told him that it'd probably be a good idea to do it this way. But he was the one that gave me a lot of my confidence in the classroom, because I could resonate with the way that he taught. And then when I was being evaluated, I still continued to have people around me, even as an instructor that was certified, like yourself and Technical Sergeant Cook, shout out if she ever sees this as well. And my entire staff as a whole, they constantly challenged me and constantly supported me. And now as an instructor, I can walk into a classroom and do a very good job. I'm not going to say I'm the best, but I try every single day to be
Go ahead, pat yourself on the back a little bit.
And that's okay. Maybe a little bit. But I only got that far through that high support and that high challenge of both of my commandants that I've had and all the people in my staff. So.
Good deal. What else do we have in here? Texas Sergeant Austin. When I think of risk, I think about how motivation and commitment play into it. To me, it seems like you all have to have the motivation to risk on the things that you are committed to. Yeah, agree. I 100% agree. So how are you guys enjoying the conversation so far?
I think you got some critiques.
Thumbs up. Awesome. You guys rock. All right, so only a couple people think. Awesome, thanks guys. Gotcha.
Where are we at on time, Sergeant Lennon?
We're at 33 minutes.
33? All right, so I think it'd probably be, that would probably be our last one.
All right.
So as far as it goes, the things to do while on lockdown.
Okay, so things to do while on lockdown. So, man, when this came about, I was sitting at home and they're like, okay, everybody's working from home now. So what do I do with my time? Now my kids are at home. My wife is at home. Kids have to do online schooling. I have to make time for work as well, because we're still doing Zoom meetings and everything. So a big thing that helped me out was a schedule for the kids and I. But for my personal sanity, some things that I like to do is I like to work out. I've started reading now because I was talking about this on Motivation Monday for Kisling, our meeting that we had on Monday. your brain, if you just sit and do nothing, your brain kind of just goes to mush. You kind of get into a sinking sand, and you just don't ever really come out of it. So it's really up to us to be able to figure out what we want to do. Some of the things like taking classes, reading books, doing a book club. Like I'm doing a book club with my family now over Zoom. So every week we meet up and we talk about certain things. I know a couple of people who are doing like musical bingo over Zoom. It's insane how many innovative things can come about with that. I walk around main base on Ramstein, and it is amazing how many lawns are mowed and taken care of now because of this. I think it's nice to have some time to ourselves, but definitely you can still continue to push yourself and get out of your comfort zone to be able to do certain things.
And I would definitely think with the theme of our talk today, risk taking. There are a lot of people that are taking a lot of risks in themselves right now, because when you're stuck in a house by yourself, there are a lot of things going on. Shout out to one of our other instructors, Staff Sergeant Lennon. He's actually been doing a lot of work and with Adobe Premiere, and he's been making a lot of videos. One of those videos he actually got an accolade for, and it was awesome. And it was through that fact that Sergeant Lennon took that risk in himself to personally develop them. Because for those of you that don't know what Adobe Premiere is and some of the effects on there, it's time consuming and very meticulous. You have to spend hours upon hours trying to develop videos in a certain way to get the effect that you want. And that could be the same for everything that you're talking about. The risk of doing those book clubs. What if you don't finish those book clubs? Well, what if the family doesn't want to do these things? What if they don't like the book we pick? What if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? There are all these things when it comes to taking risks, when it comes to personal and professional development, and even connection and social development. And I think that's something that's really important for everyone, because if you feel like you have nothing to do right now, but you're afraid that you don't have the motivation to finish a book, much like Sergeant Austin said, motivation is an important piece in this, but also having people around you that help keep you motivated in this time is very important. So read that book, start doing P90X, start doing Insanity, start hopping on Adobe Premiere, stop hopping on all these different apps and things. Now, as far as it goes, if you want to throw an expiring career as like a TikTok video host, just be mindful of the things you do when you're taking those risks. But just remember, all these things that are holding you back, they are things within you that if you take the time and you think about them and you slowly try to diminish them, that nothing can stop you from doing anything. Like myself, like I'm afraid to start my bachelor's degree again because I feel like I don't have time, and what if I fail? That's $700 I may have to pay back. But I'm about to call my school up and actually like start enrolling in classes again.
So if you think about it, this is a actual great time to help reinvent yourself. So if you're thinking about, hey, you're locked down for 2 weeks, at least 2 to 3 weeks. So another thing that we talked about at Kisling is having a vision of what you want to be, making sure that you see or write it down, vision board, if so have you. So if you have a vision board on some of the things that you want to accomplish at the end of the lockdown, write those things down where they're easily visible for you to be able to be like, all right, so this is where I want to be. I want to finish 2 books. I want to be able to host 3 PDs. I want to, how are you helping others? So another Kisling instructor doing awesome things, Sergeant Davenport, he's like, all right, so how am I going to help the Ramstein Spouses Club? Okay, so we're going to put together a workout video for them. So he's continuously working on that and getting the support when we're talking about taking those risks, taking those things. I mean, you got to have the people around you to be able to help you dive in, because I mean, it's good to have an idea, but if you don't have the people around you to be able to support your idea and the people to help you foresee that, that's another thing. But having that vision to be able to reinvent yourself during this, because if you just sit there and not really do anything, yeah, you could sit there and play video games all throughout the whole 21 days we're on lockdown, right? You'll have a good time, but you'll come out like your brain is mush. You're not, what are you going to provide for your company or your unit when you get back to working. That's something that you can put on your vision board. Hey, okay, so I want to be able to do this, and then have those people help you with those risks or those rewards to be able to push you in a further direction.
Yep, I totally agree. And the important part that I really want to put emphasis on, because I feel like it really gets lost somewhere in all of this, because we talk about how we conquer risk and how we're innovating and developing, and we're getting past fears and self-development. Like I said, when we talk about it, acknowledge, assess, advance, acclimate, but admire. Mount Everest is a good example of this as well. The process to get all the way up to Mount Everest isn't you just start the journey and you get up to the top. They have what's called the Sherpa that helps you get from one base camp to the next to get there and to run through this process. But at the end of the day, every single time that you take another step, you have to take a second to admire the progress you've made. Because as a generation, we constantly think about the finish line, but you really need to think about every single step that you're making that's getting you closer and closer to that finish line. And I would highly encourage everyone, whether it's to yourself, to your subordinates, to your peers, to your leaders, to your friends, to your family, to help them admire it and allow them to see why it's worth admiring. Because one person may not be able to admire me. I'm I'm workaholic by nature, and very seldomly will I admire my work. It's someone coming to me and patting me on the shoulder and being like, hey, you're doing a great job. Look at all the things you're doing. It's like, I didn't even notice, because I'm a workaholic. I just want to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. I want to generate results. And for the longest time, I never admired those things.
Yeah, you could be digging yourself a hole if you don't acknowledge the great things that you're doing.
Yep.
So that's definitely a big thing. So Master Burton says, make a goal for you and your team to create milestones and support to get it done. Yes, sir. And then Chief Smiley said, we may have a picture, but should have a vision of what life looks like after COVID. Have I grown? Have I become a better airman? Is my unit better? Is my organization better? Yes. So that's a good deal. A lot of leaders are kind of stuck right now because COVID changes with every week, with every passing minute. COVID changes, so they can only give you so much information, and they can tell you, okay, so now you guys are on lockdown. You guys are coming in from 8 to noon. Oh, guess what? There's another change. Well, now I need you guys to stay home. I need you guys to start wearing masks. I need you guys to be able to do this, that, and other things. So to continue to be on our toes and change those things, it's definitely important.
Yep, I definitely agree. It's one of those things. One moment you're not wearing a mask, the next moment you're at the Turkish tailors spending €10 to get you a ninja mask. You know, it's crazy, but it's stylish and cool, and I think we love it. Sergeant Lennon, what time are we at?
We're at 42 minutes. Are you guys hosting the next COVID? Coping with COVID? Are you hosting this?
Are we hosting the next hosting COVID? I can speak with our leadership. I don't think there's an issue where we can do that.
Yeah, we'll be teaching during that time.
Okay, sure.
And on that note, closing comments.
So closing comments. So a lot of the things that we talked about here, we're going to start with risk taking. So we're going to continue to stay in the fire, have the people around us stay in the fire, because you want to be molded into a weapon that's going to be able to help you complete the mission. So fail. So failing forward, right? Sergeant Vanegas was talking about that a lot, and what we're doing to move forward. And you want to move forward with the things that we were doing during lockdown?
Yes. So as far as it goes, those 5 A's that I discussed as well. Acknowledge what's stopping you from taking risks, those fears, those things that may be stopping you or hindering your advancement. Assess all those variables and lessen that fear that you have towards those things. Advance every single step of the way. Acclimate to each step, and really take a second to get ready and reassess for the next step you're going to take, and admire every single step of the way that you're taking towards getting through risk or getting through the things that you're trying to do, whether it's a short-term or a long-term decision. Now, as far as it goes, the things to do on lockdown, like remembering that you need to have a system where you are being supported and you're still being challenged. And you're also thinking about that motivation, having that vision or that vision statement, the vision board, if you will, all those things that may help you see the end and be able to admire and respect your progress as you're making it through there.
Cool. So I guess that's going to be it. So the next Coping with COVID will be hosted by NCOA. It'll be the leadership series on the 15th of April, and it will start at 10 o'clock a.m., right? 10 o'clock a.m.
Yes.
All right, good deal. So thanks all for joining.
Thank you so much, and y'all have a good day. And close.
Great job, guys.